Hi everyone, Crafty Lori here, and I am going to show you how to make this box bag, and it is fully lined and it is quilted, and it's super easy to make, and this would be a great beginner project. The supplies that you will need to make this are one-sided fusible fleece. There's bumpy, that's the fusible part, and then the fleece. One-sided, you don't need two-sided. All of my fabric has been washed and ironed before I started the project. And for the outside of your bag, you will need whatever fabric you want, and this needs to be cut 19 inches by 14 inches. And just a note, if you have fabric, like this fabric is a one-way fabric. If you have a one-way fabric and you need to cut it a specific way, because I wanted all the llamas facing up this way, just remember that the zipper is going to go on the short ends, okay? And then for the inside of the bag, you need a coordinating fabric, and I chose this fabric for the lining of the bag, the coordinating fabric. And this needs to be cut 22 inches by 17. And this is larger than what is needed. And it's important to cut it larger because we are going to trim it. And I will show you later on in the video what I mean. And then you will also need a piece of coordinating fabric. And this is 12 inches by 2.5 inches. And that is what the interfacing is for, okay? It's for the hand, this will be the handle. And you will need a piece of interfacing, and the interfacing is fusible on one side. And you will need, the interfacing needs to be 11.5 inches long by 2 inches wide. So I accomplish this by, I have a little template that I use. And again, 11.5 by 2. And then I just lay it on the interfacing, and then I cut it to the size I need. This does not have to be perfect. It's all right if it's a little longer or shorter or not cut so well, okay? So that's what you need. You need this little piece of interfacing. And this is ribbon, and you will need a 2 1/4 inch piece. I'm just guesstimating here. And this is a 3/4 inch wide ribbon. You can use any ribbon that you want. I just happen to use this because I have a ton of it. This is a 17 inch zipper. And when I fuse the fleece to the fabric, I accomplish this by using these items. I use a power press. This is the big power press, and I got it off of Amazon, and I will list it down below. A misting bottle. I love this misting bottle. And a Teflon sheet. And if you don't have a power press, that's okay. You can use just a regular iron. And then when you go to fuse the fabric together, here are the items that I use to make it easier. And to accomplish fusing the fleece to my fabric, I use a power press. And you don't need a power press, you can just use a regular iron. I use a Teflon sheet. I use a spray mister, and I love this thing. Isn't that a nice spray? It just gives out a nice misty spray, and that's what I like to use instead of a regular spray bottle. And then the 505 temporary spray adhesive. And everything I mentioned in my video that I use, I will try to have in my Amazon store down below. And this fabric has been washed and dried. And when I cut the fusible fleece, the easiest way I have found is I use that top piece of the bag and I just lay it on the fleece and I cut it that way. Then there's no, you don't have to measure it. So I'm just laying this on top and I'm just going to cut it just a tad bit bigger, and I want the bumpy side up against the wrong side of this fabric. And the fleece is a little bit bigger than the top piece, but that's okay. I'll trim it up later. And here I have the fleece and the fabric on my ironing board, and I am going to take my water mister and I'm going to mist it. And everything I'm using I will have in my Amazon store, and that will be listed down below. And then I have this power press, and this is basically a big fancy iron, and it's a power press and it's the big one. And so once I have that misted, I have a Teflon sheet that I'm going to put over the top of it. And here's my Teflon sheet. Again, everything will be in my Amazon store. And then I'm going to place the power press on top, and I'm going to push the timer button, and I have it set for 10 seconds. And then I'll move it over. And then I'll flip it over and then repeat for the other end, I should say. Now that it's fused, the fabric is fused to the fleece, I'm going to trim off the excess fleece. And I just wanted to mention that my fabric not only has it been washed and dried, it has also been ironed before I put the fleece on. It's very important to have your fabric nice and crisp and neat looking before you fuse it to the fleece. And now I'm just trimming the excess fleece off. And now it is all trimmed up. And now that I got that all trimmed up, I'm going to use some 505 temporary adhesive spray, and I'm going to spray this onto the fleece backing here. And I do this so it's more stable when I quilt the two pieces of fabric together. So I normally do this outside, but there's a big ice storm going on. And I'm just going to give it a few puffs, I call it. You don't have to go crazy. And this is my inside lining fabric. And I'm going to lay this wrong side up. And this is the outside fabric, and I'm going to lay this right side up. And I'm just going to kind of plop it in the middle. And we're going to trim up this fabric, this bottom fabric, the inside fabric here, to the right dimension. I want it a little bit bigger than what I actually need, because then there's more wiggle room to trim it. Because you don't want to cut it the exact size. I've given you the dimensions for a bigger piece, and that's what we want. See how the edges aren't the same on each side? That's okay, because we are going to trim that up afterwards, and I'll show you. And when I do the adhesive bond, I'm not doing it to make a super tight bond. I'm just doing this so my fabric doesn't slip when I'm sewing it. So it's okay if it's loosey-goosey. That's all right. It's just making a tacky bond and not like a permanent adhesive bond. You just want it so your fabric doesn't slip and slide while you're sewing it. Once my inner fabric, my lining fabric, has been spray adhesive to the felt, I am going to give it a quick iron so it's nice and smooth. I'm going to do this to the whole piece. And then once it is ironed, we're going to make a big X on the main fabric, the outer fabric, and I'll show you how to do this. And now's the time that I'll put the interfacing on the handle. So I have that on my ironing board on my Teflon sheet. And here's the interfacing, and I'm just going to line that up. So there's a little bit of fabric showing on each side. And there it is. And then I'll take the power press and I'll just lay it on top for 10 seconds. And that is all fused on there. Now on one of these ends I have to turn it under 1/4, and I'm going to do that with a smaller iron. And this is my smaller iron, and to make it easier to turn this under, I'm just going to use a tiny piece of heat and bond. This is just a tiny piece of heat and bond, and I'm going to lay it, just a tiny piece of heat and bond. This isn't necessary, this is just something extra I do. And I'm going to lay that on there, and then I'll take the iron and I'll fuse it on there. So once it's cooled, I'm going to peel off the paper. And now there is an adhesive there. And I'm going to turn this under about 1/4. And then I'll use the iron to tack it down. You know, the heat and bond step you really don't have to do, but you do have to iron this piece 1/4. And I have a large cutting mat here, but I'm not going to use it for cutting. I'm going to use it for the straight edge. So I can make a big X on my fabric. And I will do this by taking my fabric and I am going to slip it under the mat. And I will have it corner to corner. And as you can see, it's corner to corner, and I'm going to take this black marking pen. This is a heat friction pen, so the marks will come off when the fabric is heated up. And then you can see the nice black line, and then I will do that same thing to this corner, to this corner. And now I have the perfect X on my fabric. Now it's time to sew. Now to sew, I'm going to use a straight stitch, and my stitch length is 3.0, and I'm putting the presser foot down, and then I'm just going to sew on one of the lines, and then I'll rotate it and sew on the other line. Then when I get to the end, and just so you know, you don't have to back stitch on these stitches because we're gonna sew over the ends of them, so there's no point in back stitching. So I'm going to raise a presser foot, and right away I'm going to clip the ends. I got a tangle here. But I'm going to clip the ends as close as possible. I call this chasing threads at the end. If you don't do this, you don't want to chase all those ends. And I'm going to do the same from where I started on this end. I'm going to make sure I get these, oh, can you see? There we go. I'm going to make sure I get all these ends trimmed right away. And now I'm just going to rotate it, and then I'm going to start on my other black line, the X. And again, I'm just going to sew on that black line. No need to backstitch in the beginning or the end. Okay, again, clip the threads as close as possible and do this right away. Clip the threads right away. And I'm going to do it on the other side. Okay. Now, this is how we're going to make the quilting grid, I call it. And there is a quilting arm that you can get as a guide. I have one, but personally, I don't like it. So this is the method I use, and this is what I like to do. This is a piece of cardstock, and it's 2 pieces taped together. And this is 1.5 inches wide. And I'm going to hold that up to, the sewing that I've already done. And then I'm going to put my presser foot right on the edge of that cardstock. And then I'm just going to start sewing, and I'm just going to keep this cardstock straight on that first stitching line I made. And I'm just going to follow the cardstock with my presser foot. And I'm just adjusting the cardstock as I sew. Boy, that's really jumpy. It's really hard to record while you're sewing. I'm trying to make it so the tripod isn't jumping. So I'm having to sew super slow instead of going my normal speed. Okay, and I'm at the end. So again, I'm going to clip my threads as soon as possible. And as close as possible. I don't want to, can't see it, it's matching. And then this is my second line, and again, I'm just taking the cardstock, and I'm going to do the same thing. I always try to start with the needle down. But I'm going to do that all the way across this way, you know, diagonally, and then on this side, diagonally, and then this is the other X line, and I'm going to do the same thing diagonally. And that's how you get your quilting grid squares. And then when I get to this little itty bitty corner here, I don't have to use my template anymore. I'm just going to guesstimate because this part really isn't going to matter. So just so that corner gets tacked down. And now and then I'm rotating it, and I am going to finish up. See, this is the X I started on, so now I got to go to this side and do the same thing. And now that I have all my grid sewn on the fabric and the fleece lining, it's nice and snug, it's time to trim the sides. This is a 1-inch wide piece of cardstock, and I'm going to lay it flush with the top piece of the fabric there. And then I got my marking pen again, and I'm just going to draw a line. I'm using this as a straight edge. And I am going to do that on all the sides. I just make sure it's flush. I don't push it. I don't really push it hard. I just kind of lay it. That's a short side. That side's done. Now we're going to do this side. See, this part is pretty much 1 inch. This is why I cut the coordinating fabric bigger, because it's very, very hard. If you were to cut it the exact size you need to get this piece centered on it, it's really hard. I've tried it and it doesn't work well. So I rather cut my piece bigger and trim it. Then it's neater that way and easier, because it was really frustrating when I was trying to do it the other way. Okay, now it's time to trim, and I'm just going to follow my lines, and then it will be trimmed perfectly. Okay, it's all trimmed up and it's the perfect size I need. And now the next step will be sewing this is a faux binding, and it will be sewing the faux binding to the top piece of the fabric. All right, and now it's time to prep the long sides, and by the long sides I mean the long sides, not the short end. So I have my ironing board here, and I have my little iron, and I have my mister, and I'm going to mist the long sides, and then I'm going to fold in up to the top fabric, and I'm going to iron. I just set the iron on it for a little bit, and this is a steam iron, and I'm going to do that the length of the long sides on both sides. And now I want to bring this up and over the top fabric, and I'm going to iron again, and I'm going to mist it again, and I'm going to fold up, and then I'll press it. This is making our faux binding. Then I have some wonder clips here, and I'm just going to clip those down. I'm going to use 4 for the long sides here. That's just to ensure that when I'm sewing it, it stays nice and flat. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other long side. And now it's time to sew the long sides down. And for sewing the sides, I'm going to use a zigzag. So I'm going to push my zigzag stitch. And then I'm going to make this the height of the stitch is going to be 6. And then the length of the stitch is going to be 2.4. I'm going to start on either side, it doesn't matter. And now on this one, when I stitch, I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. So I'm going to take a couple of stitches and then I'm going to back stitch. And when I'm stitching, I have my presser foot, so I'm sewing right in the middle of my faux binding. You know, not too far to the right and not too far to the left. I take out the clips as I go. If I see any like puckering, I can smooth it down with my fingers as I go. And then when I get to the end, I'm not going to sew all the way up here, you know, to the end of the faux binding, just to the end of the top fabric. And then I'm going to back stitch. And I'm going to trim my threads. And now I'm sewing the other side. And again, I'm going to start by stitching where the top fabric is. And it's the same zigzag. I'm going to sew and then I'm going to back stitch a little bit. And then I'm going to go right down the middle. And I'm going to end the same way. By back stitching. Cutting the threads. And now we'll prepare the ends here for our zipper. So now we're going to prep the short ends, and this is the zipper part. This is where we'll sew the zipper, and don't worry, sewing the zipper in is super easy. And I'm going to moisten this fabric. And to reduce the bulk, instead of, going like this, turning it in 1/4 and then, or 1/2 inch and then another 1/2 inch, you get a lot of bulk right there. So I am going to fold this in a little triangle, kind of like you would do a gift. And I'm going to iron that down. And then I'm going to do the same for the other side. I'm going to turn it in. So it's a little triangle. Whoops, there's some threads I didn't trim. I'll get those later. And I'm going to do the same thing, a little triangle. This is kind of like a faux mitered corner. Iron that down really well. And then I'm going to re-moisten. And then I'm going to turn it in 1/2 inch up to the top of the fabric there. And I'm going to press it really well. And then I'm going to fold it on top of the fabric. But see, it's like a faux mitered corner. And you're not going to really see this part of the bag. So if it's not perfect, that's okay. Okay, then I'm going to use Wonder Clips again. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other end. And there, now the ends are ready for the zipper. And don't worry, sewing the zipper in is going to be easy. So don't be scared. I know a lot of people don't like to sew zippers, but this is super crazy easy. Alrighty, it's time to put in the zipper. And basically what we have made is a 19 by 14 inch placemat. And I start on the left side of the zipper. And I want it unzipped. I'm going to place the top of the bag. See this metal part right here? I want that up about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'll just place this Wonder Clip back on there, just to hold it in place. And you want the zipper zipped all the way down, all the way. But it's important to put the bag about 1/4 inch away from the top of the zipper, that little metal part there. And we're going to use the same zigzag that we did when I sewed the long sides. Okay, and that zigzag, again, is 2.4 and 6. And I'm not going to use a zipper foot. I don't need one. I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to take a few stitches and then I am going to back stitch. And then I'm just making sure that the edge of the zipper is right along the side of the bag. And it's not, you know, this isn't overlapping on the zipper. Then when I get to the end, I'm going to back stitch a little bit. I'm going to trim the threads. And then I'm going to zip it up because I want to make a certain mark. So I'm going to zip it up. See, beautiful. That works out so well. You don't even have to use a zipper foot. Now, I want this piece right here. I don't want this to be all wonky like that or up too far. So what I'm going to do is, with it zipped up, I am just going to eyeball this to where I want it. And I'm just going to make a little mark. So then that's where I know this fabric needs to lay. Okay, see right there? And I'm going to do the same thing on the other end. So I'll flip it around. And I'm just going to eyeball it. And I want to make sure that's about the same. And we make a little mark. Yeah, that showed up. Okay. Now, in order to sew this, you have to have the zipper open. It's going to work better if the zipper is open. So I'm going to open the zipper. And I'm just going to make sure that I clip that to where that end is. This would be the end of the zipper, but where you unzipped it. So I'm going to start sewing on this end, and I'm just gonna make sure I got the top of the bag right there where my mark is, and you can use a wonder clip or a pin if you want. And then you got to kind of squish this under the sewing machine and make sure that you don't sew any extra parts of the bag. Okay, and then I always make sure that the zipper did not get twisted. And I'm just going to place this zipper pull here, make sure this is behind my foot. And it's relatively straight. I'll put my presser foot down. I take off the clip, and I'm going to take a few stitches. Again, the zigzag stitch. And then I'm going to back stitch a little bit. And then I'm just going to make sure that the zipper is laying correctly. And then I'm going to start sewing. Then I want to make sure where that mark is I made, I want to make sure that the end of my bag is not too far under that mark or over that mark. So sometimes that requires like pulling the zipper maybe a little bit tighter and adjusting this fabric right here. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to back stitch. And then I'm going to clip my threads. And the zipper is sewn in. See, that wasn't so hard. There it is, the zipper is sewn in. Now I want to sew the handle of the zipper. So this is the handle, and that was the interfacing that I ironed on. And I'm going to fold this right sides together. And this is just going to be a straight stitch. Right sides together. And I'm not going to iron this. I really don't need to. And then I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You have to, because you want the seam to be in the back of the handle. So when you're done sewing the side, you flatten that part out and then you sew the end. And I don't iron it, it's called finger pressing. So I'm going to sew 1/4, the end 1/4, and then I'm just going to back stitch. And now to turn this, so we have the flat handle, I take this tube turner and I stick that inside. And then I have this chopstick and I stick that in the tube. And then I roll it down. And it turns your tube for you. It's much easier than but if you don't have a tube turner, you can just use a pencil. And then with this kind of pointy end, I can poke out the corners there. And that's the handle. And see the seams on the inside there? And that's so when you fold it over, you don't see the seam. And for the handle, I am going to iron it so it's not so puffy, but I just make sure that the seam is on the back here. And then I just take my iron and I iron it flat, just so it's nice and crisp. So because when I fold it, I want it to be nice and crisp. To sew the handle onto the bag, you're going to have your bag with the right side up. You're going to unzip the zipper. Now this part that I'm going to show you is important, because if you try to sew the handle on without doing this part I'm going to show you, it won't, this will get all like separated like that, and you don't want it that way. You want it close together. So I have a needle and a thread, and I'm just going to take a few stitches, a few hand stitches, and they don't have to look nice. I'm going to make sure that the zipper portion matches up. You know, this part and this part are matched up. And then I'm just going to take a few stitches. Like I said, they don't have to be nice and neat, because you're not going to see these. And I'm going to do this until I get down to here. And I pull it tight. But not so tight that you'll break the thread, but just tight. And then one more, and then I'll just do a little knot. And now it's ready to sew the handle. To sew the handle on, I am going to place, this is the open end. And this I consider the top of the bag. When closed, the zipper pull would be up here, but I have it open, and it's important to have it open. So I'm going to place the handle with the seam facing up at the end of the bag, and then I kind of scrunch it so I can get it under the presser foot, because you don't want to accidentally sew the bag together. I've done that. And I place the handle up at the top, one side of the handle, and then I'm just going to stitch. I'm going to barely stitch it on. I'm just going to go like an 1/8 inch down, and you don't have to back stitch. I'm not even going to trim my threads. I'm going to pull it out, and then I'm going to bring the other side of the handle up. I'm going to lay it on top even with the other handle, with the other side of the handle. And then I'm going to barely sew it down again, about 1/8. And this is just essentially tacking it down. And now I'll cut the threads. And now on the other end is where I'm going to sew the tab. And this tab is optional. It does have a function. It functions as you can hold the tab when you're unzipping or zipping the bag. And so I like that. Plus, I think it adds a little bit of pizzazz to it. I don't know if you call it pizzazz, whatever. But this is the little piece of the ribbon that I cut. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure that it's even. And I'm going to just take 1/8 of an inch just to tack it down. And then I'm going to bring the other side up, and I'm going to do the same thing just to tack it down. And then I'll cut my threads. And now it's time to turn the bag inside out. So I just pull it through, and the bag's inside out. And then it doesn't matter what end you start on, but whatever end I start on, I'm going to fold it like this so I can find the middle. And then I'm just going to place a little pin there. and that's the middle. Then I'm going to fold the bag flat, and I'm going to find where that middle is, and I'm going to make sure it's in the middle of the zipper. Then I flatten the bag nice. And now I'm going to straight stitch the end of the bags together. And when I do this, I'm going to go, about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to straight stitch. You don't have to back stitch because you're going to cut this part away anyway. So I'm going to go all the way across my bag. When I get to the pin, I'll pull the pin out. When I get to the zipper, I'm going to make sure that I back stitch over the zipper and then continue. And then I continue forward until I get to the end. There's no need to back stitch. And now I'm going to trim the zipper off. And I'm going to do this with a heavier duty pair of scissors, because I don't want to use my good sewing scissors cutting the zipper. That's garbage. And we're going to sew the other side the same way as we did this side. And this one you don't have to mark, because if you just keep folding it in, it'll go to the right spot that it's supposed to be. And make sure the zipper is open, okay? And then again, just straight stitch about 1/2 inch. And you don't have to back stitch at the beginning or the end. When I get to the zipper, I'm going to sew over it, I'm going to back stitch over it, and I'm going to sew over it again. And I'm using my heavy duty scissors to cut the zipper off. Be careful not to cut the fabric. Now it's time to make the gussets on all 4 of the corners. And now it's time to make the gussets, and I have a template here, and the template is 1 3/4 inches this way and 2 1/4 inches this way. And I'm going to place the template with the long side against the fold, and I just hold it while I cut it, but you can trace it if you want. And this is a rag snipping scissors, and these are my favorite scissors for doing this. You can do it with the regular scissors, but these work much, much better. And I am just going to cut around the template. And I'm going to do this on all 4 corners. And this is why you didn't have to back stitch right here, because you're cutting this part away anyway. But all 4 corners are cut away, and this is going to make our gussets. And this is going to make our gussets. And this is how we're going to sew the gussets. You got this part cut out, and you're going to fold it in so the long sides are even with each other. This is an easier way of making gussets. And just sometimes you got to fiddle with it a little bit to get it even. And these are even. And I'm going to sew 1/4. And these you want to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. And then I have, this is the seam. I'm going to make sure that's laying flat. For a finished look, I like to zigzag on the gussets. And the zigzag I use is 4.5 peak. And then the stitch length is 2.4. I do back stitch at the beginning and the end. And I do this to all 4 gussets. And then I trim up any threads that I find. And the bag is done, so now it's time to turn it right side out. And that's one of the reasons you have to have the zipper open. Here we go. This is the exciting part. This is the part that I really like, because it looks so cute. And I'm just popping out those gussets, those corners of the gusset. And there's the bag. It is complete. And once you've made a few of these, you can crank these out so quick. And they can be makeup bags, they can be stamp bags. This one, of course, is, has a makeup themed fabric, but they can be stamp bags. I store a lot of stamps in these bags. You can make you could get a more manly print and make it a shaving kit. But super easy and super cute. And here are some of the bags that I've made. I just went through my fabric stash and I just picked fabric that I liked and I just made a bunch of bags. And I enjoy making these. They're fun to make. This one has glitter fabric. And I'll be making more, and I gave a bunch away for Christmas. And these are easy to make. And I think these are a great project for beginners or if you like to sew. And after you make a couple, you can really crank these out. They're really easy to make. So if you're new to my channel, welcome, and please hit that subscribe button. And thanks for watching. Bye.